Good evening, good evening, good evening. Thank you very much for your company as ever on this glorious Sunday, although the clocks have gone back. And I must say, it fills me with absolute dread. I can't stand the darker nights. I'm a summer person. I like the sun. I like the light. It makes us feel better. I think I'm one of those sad people. And I don't mean sad as in I've got no life, but sad as a seasonal affective disorder. You know, that whatever that sad acronym represents, I've got it. But anyway, on that gloomy note aside, I must apologise for my tardiness last week, where I felt absolutely beastly and couldn't put on the Sunday roast. But I am putting it on this Sunday. So thank you again to everybody who's joining for your company. It is much appreciated. Every subscriber allows me to keep on doing what I'm doing. As you all know, I left a job in television to do this. I left a job to actually be a part of the reform movement, and I see this, and we'll get onto it a little bit later, as a movement that is Britain's last chance. I see this as Britain being in last chance saloon, and that unless actually we take a stand, that we are lost as a country. And I said this all day yesterday. It was Reforms Action Day. I did a little bit of broadcasting, some of you might have seen, in which we were getting people to sign up as members. You know, every member allows the party to be able to get another Durham elected. And another Durham elected takes us one step closer to the next general election being a fighting chance for Britain's survival and revival. So thank you to all of you for doing that indeed. Now, Simon says, I love the dark. He disagrees with me, but Hillary agrees. Hillary hates the dark. Now, Hillary doesn't want me to talk about Sarah Pochin. Now, I'm sorry, Hillary, I am going to disappoint you because it was a request that came in via our exclusive community chat, which I would recommend you all join because it's a great hub of people and a great little community that we've built there. It's sort of like, I would say, a spin-off from the GB News chat with Grumpy Grandad as its chief. I hope I haven't upset anyone saying that. Michelle could be a dark chief, and I mean dark in the sense of she's got a wicked sense of humour, and that's not an insult, Michelle, I promise. But thank you to everyone who put their submissions in to that chat for topics for tonight, which I've been led on, much to Hillary's dismay. I hope we don't lose you, Hillary. I will get on to other topics, I promise. It won't be that long. But I do need to talk to you about Sarah Pochin. You know, when I woke up this morning, I thought, bloody hell, what the hell's this? Turned on the box and I watched a little bit of Sky News, and Zia Youssef, our policy chief, was interviewed by Trevor Phillips, and he gave a robust defence of Sarah Pochin and her comments yesterday around this particular issue. So Zia Youssef, it says on this Sky News article, defends MP accused of racism. The party is being urged to take action against Sarah Pochin, who was forced to apologise after she said, "It drives me mad when I see adverts full of black people, full of Asian people." Now, context is everything, my friends. You can spin absolutely anything, and the Labour Party have been at it all day. We're in the throes of fascism. You know, saying this is a racist dog whistle, effectively. That's what they've been saying all damn day today. Now, they call it racism, right? I actually would argue that Sarah Pochin is backed by data here. Sarah Pochin pointed out the blindingly obvious. That TV adverts, telly adverts, unless you're watching, I don't know, GB News or something like that, they're stuffed full of demographics that don't give you a full picture of how our nation looks. And this isn't just a United Kingdom phenomenon. It's also evident in the United States, especially post Black Lives Matter, when every woke corporate imaginable thought, we need to be diverse and inclusive. And that means showing every advert, you basically have an anti-white narrative where you don't show white families because that would be bad. That wouldn't be diverse. You'd be branded as a bigot and all these other things. So anyway, the demographics are all totally stacked against white people. But for saying this, Sarah Pochin was branded a bigot. And it's because she spoke the uncomfortable truth that the woke liberati inside the M25 desperately want to silence. She had a point, and as I say, this is backed by data. But before we get onto that data, have a look at the histrionics given by our health secretary, Wes Streeton, and his outraged pals in the mainstream media. Have a listen.
What she said was a total disgrace. There is no explanation for what she said other than her words were racist. Now, she might be embarrassed by her racism now, but the least she can do is admit it and apologise for it. And as a country, we cannot allow what has been, I think, one of the most successful multi-faith, multicultural countries in the world to slide back to the days where people walk down the street afraid of being abused or attacked because of what they look like or who they worship. That is not who we are. That is not the kind of country we are, and we're not going back there. But we will only be able to confront and defeat this racism if we're prepared to call it out and if the vast majority of decent people are prepared to face it down and not be bystanders. She should be utterly ashamed of herself. And the deafening silence from her own party leadership show that Reform UK cannot be trusted to govern this country because they think our country's flag belongs to only some of us rather than all of us.
You know, Byron makes a very good point in the comments in the chat on this topic. And Byron says, Wes is terrified of his tiny majority. And he has an ickle-wickle majority. And he's... Well, he is very much afraid to lose it. I was going to say he's afraid to use it. That would be a little something else. But anyway, he's afraid of his little tiny majority, my friends. And that majority was lessened over the Gaza war, the Hamas war after the October 7th attacks in Israel and the response by the Israelis. He saw a mass movement with Gaza independence looking to unseat him, and they very nearly did. They nearly did it. It happened to Jess Phillips too, the woman who could eat an apple through a letterbox. Well, she, is all through the press trying to pander to, I would argue, some of the most obnoxious elements in society, seeking to water down the rape gang inquiry. Now, Wes here is wrong because we've got the data. I'll show you it right here. Adverts overrepresent, and this is according to data that has been collated not by me, but by a major study. It's a Channel 4 audit, right? And Sarah Pochin referenced this. It's called Mirror on the Industry, right? So it was showing a mirror to the industry of what its output actually comes to represent. So the adverts overrepresent black people while ignoring the over 70s. And you know why I think that is? Because the over 70s are more likely to vote, and they're more likely to vote for parties on the right. Parties on the right that the wogerati in the media class and the advertising industries cannot stand. Pro-border controls, the worst vestiges of multiculturalism. Wes Streeton in that clip there said that he was afraid that we would get back to people walking down the street and feeling unsafe. People already feel like that. People feel like that when they're living next door to a HMO of 6 foreign young men who they know next to nothing about, that the state has enforced upon them. When they're walking down certain streets in London, certain streets in Birmingham, certain streets in Luton, certain streets in Bradford, wherever else it might be, they feel unsafe. You shouldn't have to feel like that in your own country. And I think that this report here that was put out, this was only reported in October of the 1st of October of this year, and a study into the representation of minorities in television adverts found that half of them, more than half, I should say, actually feature black people, but disabled people remain severely underrepresented. And I mean, if you're a white disabled person, well, good luck to you. But the research was carried out by the agency Tapestry for a 6th year, which audited the top 500 adverts across all broadcasters over 2 separate 4-week periods. It found that the proportion of adverts featuring black people jumped after the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, which, let's not forget, is a movement that assaulted members of our police force, put a woman in hospital, and ripped down our statues, causing public damage. And in the wake of that, they said on bended knee, quite literally, that they were going to up their intake of adverts that actually featured primarily black people. So it went from 37% in 2020 to 51% in 2022. Now, I am absolutely not against black people or brown people being in adverts. Neither Sarah Pochin. What we are saying, though, is that what it shows is the industry now relies on tokenism and stereotyping. And the problem isn't with Sarah Pochin. The problem is the arty-farty advertising industry trying to socially engineer what Britain ought to look like, not what Britain does look like, and leaving the average white family underrepresented and the elderly underrepresented, the disabled underrepresented. And when you lie about who we are, well, you do us all a great disservice. Why should we buy your products here? And the images here of the likes of let's not forget the Anne Boleyn portrayal, where Anne Boleyn was cast as a black woman, followed by, a slew of historic programs who are totally historically illiterate in the portrayal in the latest series from the BBC, King and Conqueror, for example. They had there were a load of black actors cast in a program that was meant to be based on 1066, the era of the Battle of Hastings. Well, I'm no historian. I'm no Dr. David Starkey, but I can tell you right now that ain't how Britain looked in that age. And the rot runs even deeper than advertising, because these scenes here, my friends, I would argue, show us that there is a problem with multiculturalism. These people don't just want to control the present, they want to rewrite our past. I mentioned the litany of programs, your license fees paying for to rewrite history, so young people watching television today think that actually the Anglo-Saxons could have been black people. Well, actually they weren't. They call it colourblind casting. I call it cultural gaslighting, actually. And I think it's a pathetic double standard, right? They'd never cast a white actor or actress as, say, Winnie Mandela or Martin Luther King. And I think that actually I would agree with that. I think rightly so. Yet they are perfectly happy to erase and revise our own heritage in the name of diversity, acceptance, and tolerance. If you ask me, it's intolerance. It's intolerance of defending what was our past, and it was a glorious past. We, through that 1,000-year history, gave the world so very much. And with Wes Streeton's pathetic lecture in which he says, multicultural success story, all these other things, he claims that we're sliding back to the 1970s racism and that our flag only belongs to some of us. That's what we're doing in the flying of the flag, the flying the colour campaign. Well, I say, have a look at our capital city, of which you are a parliamentary member. So refugees are welcome here, right? But what got me was the sea of men in masks, sea of men in hoods, sea of men who were clearly there to, if at all possible, start an attack on those protesting. Now, there was a protest here led by those who were opposed to mass migration, and that's why these men were here. I think actually if there was a protest the other way around, in which there were activists who were protesting against mass migration, stood at the sidelines of a pro-migration protest, wearing these masks and the hoods up, that the police would intervene. The police would say that this is an act of intimidation and that actually it can't go on the streets of our capital city. But this lot get a free pass. The party that Wes Streeton actually represents is trying to actually use the likes of, well, women who are come from the northwest of England to score cheap political points because she dared say that actually there's nothing wrong, effectively, there's nothing wrong with being white. Well, I don't think there is anything wrong with being white. And he says this is about who built this country. Well, 1,000 years of history primarily was built by white people. I don't think there's anything racist in saying that. You know, I think we all ought to cherish St. George's Cross. We all ought to cherish the banner of the Union Jack. We all ought to cherish the flag of our country. And that he and his liberal left echo chamber seem utterly embarrassed and acquiescent to every movement that doesn't want to do that. And that got me thinking about a video that I came across earlier today, in which a woman says that how would the flying of our national flags make black and brown people feel? And I feel like this is actually the argument that Wes Streeton is using too.
No.
What about the people of colour that live here?
They should.
So if you didn't hear that, what about the people of colour that live here? And this is going on as this man is putting up flags on lampposts.
This represents them.
We like Union Jack, but we don't bring St George's flag, so how do I know you're going to start putting
The St George's flags is going up.
You can't do this now.
It's in England.
Not everybody wants to put the flag up.
Why not?
You're recording me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's do this one and then we'll work our way down to that one.
I won't move you, won't you, till 8?
Come on, we'll do this one.
Come on.
She's fine.
The police are coming now.
Yeah, that's
You know them
fine.
well.
Yeah, that is fine.
The police are coming. For what?
Rest in
Flying
peace,
a
Tara.
flag?
Say that again.
For long.
Say that again.
You've been racist for long.
I will.
Have you been racist for long? By the way, that to me is assault. But anyway, you know, she says, have you been racist for long? How would black and brown people feel about you flying our flag? Well, I'll tell you how it makes patriotic Brits feel, and it'll include those who are black and brown, that actually they feel proud. If you believe that our national flag is inherently divisive, then you've already lost faith in the nation itself. It's a national emblem. It's not a political tool. And I go on to talk about the fact of the matter is that the real disgrace here and the supposed most successful multicultural country in the world, we can't fly our own flags for fear of offending other groups. We can't actually call out masked thugs on our streets, hooded masked paramilitaries effectively in the extreme left, who that's their answer to legitimate debate on migration, to turn up and intimidate and silence ordinary people protesting against mass uncontrolled migration. This is a sign, my friends. This is a sign of a society in disharmony, not harmony. It's a sign of a nation where free speech, debate, and expression is under siege from a militant liberal zealot. And the grooming gangs, right? The grooming gangs. I ask you, what about that suggests that there is a rich multicultural success story to champion here? The one where countless vulnerable, primarily white girls were brutally abused by gangs of predominantly Pakistani origin men, and the local authorities, the police, the Labour-run councils, they all turned a blind eye for years and years and years, decades, over cultural sensitivity and fear of being called racist. And now the national inquiry, hard fought for, and we had to drag the Labour government into actually bringing this about, well, it's already devolved into a deep systemic failure. It's collapsed, like my attempt at Yorkshire Puds. Victims have quit, saying that the government, and I shouldn't call them victims, survivors have quit, saying that the government is trying to water down and dilute the focus away from the specific nature of this evil to spare some blushes and focus instead on what I would argue are diversionary tactics. It's a collapsing inquiry into the very worst child abuse scandal in modern history. Our history is being rewritten on screen. Masked thugs intimidating British citizens protesting, which is their legal right. And we're lectured by the liberal elite about adverts and the racism to point out that actually that that there is an overrepresentation within the advertising industry. No, Mr. Streeton and the Labour Party, a nation where victims are being betrayed, where the flag is a problem, where free speech is met with masked intimidation. That's not a successful multicultural country. It's a failed experiment run by those who put globalist dogma before the safety and representation of their own people. And we won't be silenced into that. We won't actually be made to walk over hot coals for seeing and pointing out the truth. That's my view, my friends. And I'm sorry if that's offensive to members of the political class and Mr. Wes Streeton. Let's have a look at what some of you have
was
had
a
to say.
total disgrace. There is no explanation for what
Shut up. I'm not listening to that again. Right, let's have a look at what you have had to say to my rant there. And I'm sorry, Hillary, I know I was talking about the one issue that you've heard people ramble about all day, but I felt I needed to because that was one of the requests that was made by our wonderful viewers. Now, Grumpy Grandad says, if that's not a warning, I don't know what is, about the masked people on the streets. Stephen says streeting is an idiot. Hilary Shaw says this is what thuggery looks like with the masked people on the street. Grumpy Grandad again, that's the Britain of the future if we can't sort this out. I agree. I think we are at real risk of a state of civil war if we don't get this right. And people like Wes Streeton need to wake up and smell the coffee or the chai latte, whatever people in Islington drink. I've got absolutely no idea. And Nicole says we should never apologise for truths. CJ Thomas, you just need to watch ITV for a couple of hours to think we have become a white minority country. And that probably will happen. In I think it's 2063 off the top of my head. By 2063, there will be a white minority. And I don't think that's with the democratic consent of the British public. I don't think anyone ever voted for that to be the case. Whatever you think about there being a white minority, whatever you may think, no one voted for it. That's my problem. It's the democratic oversight of such a fundamental rewiring of the country. John says, the woke liberati have been having a field day over her statement, which was totally objective. Why shouldn't advertising represent everyone proportionately across our country? Exactly, John. After all, it is our money that they're supposedly canvassing for, is it not? No Laughing Matter says, as a white female, I've never felt so unsafe in the United Kingdom. And Hillary tells Wes Streeton to, a word that's less polite than sling your ook. You can guess what she said. Michelle says he'll be gone at the next general election. And Terry asks, why does the truth upset so many people? It's a good question, Terry. Very, very good question. On the national inquiry, Michelle says that's why the inquiry's been deliberately delayed for the May elections next year. Well, yeah, because they're fearing what might come out from that. And Hillary says they're putting everything they can out of context to try and get out reform. This is an attack, and these attacks are going to increase by a factor of goodness only knows what. This is going to get far worse, far, far worse. And that actually leads me nicely on to our next topic, which again was another request by one of our viewers. Now, the Caerphilly by-election. We need to talk about it. I haven't given my views on it yet, and I know a lot of you were asking why that is and what I've got to say for myself. Well, I think actually the Caerphilly by-election wasn't just an ordinary by-election. To me, it was actually a warning which goes to the heart of the fundamental issue that we face as a nation. There was a patchwork or there is, I think, a patchwork of the permanently offended. You know, you have Gaza-obsessed activists in your party. It's not my party, actually, at all. I think it's the party of those who represent elements of the extreme left. The Greens, who've parked the planet to chant about Palestine instead, with that man with the St. George's Cross gap in his teeth, who used to say he could go around and use hypnotism to enlarge a woman's breasts. You don't have to go to Turkey anymore. You can get it done by sitting in Zach Polanski's chair. Nuttier than a fruitcake, dangerous ideas would lead our country into the depths of despair. And of course, a Labour Party at the centre of all of this, and I don't mean the centre of British politics, they're going off to the left trying to chase the votes of these loony groups. Well, the Labour Party are losing their grip. And the one, they've all actually, I include the Lib Dems in this, who promise something different to Devon than they do to Durham. Well, they've got one goal, and that goal is to stop Reform UK at all costs. Now, Labour was buried in carefully. It was carefully buried in carefully, you could say, but But the extreme left coalition forming across Britain, I don't think it's any laughing matter. The SNP pretend to be nationalist while prioritising foreigners over Scottish people in Glasgow. That's going on right now. There's a severe housing crisis in Glasgow. But if you turn up there as a foreigner, well, you've got greater rights than you would have in England. So you're getting a surge of foreigners going up there to Glasgow. Glasgow was only recently named the drug capital of Europe. There are a lot of people there in the depths of despair that need the help of central government. But instead, the Scottish nationalists would rather focus on foreigners. And Plaid Cymru, who won the by-election in Carefully, is exactly the same. Wales first in slogan, but it's Wales last in practice. And the Conservatives, well, the Tory party, they've fallen so far off the back benches that they're now down in the parliamentary sewers that Guy Fawkes once crawled through, mumbling apologies to every lobby group that they used to oppose in a sort of flurry of vote-seeking exercise. But what Keverly actually proves is very simple, that British politics has split into two camps. There are two camps, as I see it. Reform, not reform. Save Britain, continue down the path of completely irreversible decline. We won't have a country if we go on like this, and they will exacerbate that. So reform on one side, this coalition of anti-British sentiment. So there are people on the left side who believe in borders, who believe in common sense, who believe in Britain as a project and an ancient project of that, which is worth saving. And on the other, a coalition of total chaos, a devolution into a globalist, Islam-obsessed, far-left internationalist, hammering what would be the final nail in our national coffin, in our national identity. And the truth that nobody else has been willing to say on this is that Britain, with Boris Johnson exacerbating the crisis here, we've taken in 10 million more people in just 20 years. So for 2/4 of my life, right, we have taken in 10 million people. 10 million people. No country on earth, especially not one of our size, could possibly hope to integrate that many people in just 20 short years. And we're seeing that play out on the streets of Britain. Wes Streeton says we're a multicultural success story. I would ask him to take a good hard look at the streets. Week in, week out, intimidatory tactics of the pro-Gaza fascists. At this rate, we're on course, as I mentioned, to be a white minority by 2063. Now, whatever your view, that's a transformation unprecedented outside of an invasion, outside of a invading army coming in and taking over a country. And it's happening without a single shred of democratic consent ever being issued, ever being given to the political class. So if we as a party, and I mean my party, Reform UK, if we don't get this right at the next election, then they'll finish the job. It'll be over. The country that our grandparents built will be gone. You know, my grandfather fighting in the Durham Light Infantry, your grandparents, your ancestors, and we'll only have ourselves to blame if we don't get our act together and get behind the one party willing to actually have the bollocks to do something about it. So carefully, wasn't a by-election. It was actually, I think, a prophecy. The so-called Party of the People, the Labour Party, got buried in the valleys in which it was created, by the way. And as if to hammer in the headstone, Labour crowned Lucy Powell its deputy leader. She was sacked 2 minutes ago by Keir Starmer, and she's the same MP who called the grooming gang concerns a dog whistle. That's its new deputy leader. Grooming gangs are a dog whistle. They're going backwards on a national inquiry into those rape gangs. You don't have to be Albert Einstein to figure out what's going on here. In the middle of that rape gang inquiry falling apart, Labour's answer is to promote the woman who says even talking about those crimes is an act of racism. If there's a surer sign that Labour's moral compass is spinning like a wind turbine on the days it does spin, by the way, in a blooming gale of the kind that we've got in here in County Durham right now, well, I haven't seen it. Lucy Powell's victory isn't just a personnel change. It's a declaration of the Labour Party that Labour's future lies with the hard left activists, not the working people of Britain, with the cultural commissars, as they think of themselves as, you know, worthy people who love arty-farty things and love stomping around Islington or Liverpool or wherever else, the cities primarily. They think of themselves as cultural commissars. They don't think about the communities of this country. And with the sort of people who think that British values is some dodgy, sick joke, a punchline, not something that ought to be championed. So you've got Starmer's party, led now by two people terrified of saying anything normal. You've got one of them cannot define a woman. The other thinks victims' families are dog whistling. This isn't leadership. It's group therapy for the personally offended. But actually, I would argue that people have noticed, and that's the news I would ask you to take away from this. People have noticed. The by-election shows that the mask has slipped. Ordinary voters, the folk that Labour used to rely on, and by the way, the candidate in the by-election has been there for his life, I assume, and he's campaigned and stood decade after decade. Actually, I think as long as last time Maggie Thatcher was in office in 89, her last term in office, he stood for election the first time. So this goes back a long while. But ordinary voters, the people that the Labour Party used to rely on in places like this, in places like Wales, in places like Scotland, reform is rising because somebody is finally saying what millions think. That prejudice and patriotism aren't the same thing. And wanting border isn't bigotry. That actually a recognition that if you don't have borders, you're not a nation. And if you're not a nation, what are you other than an international airport lounge for the world's working people trying to get to make a quick buck or to get some benefits? So Labour can try and paper over the cracks and say nothing to see here, my friends. But you can't build a movement, and this is what I think we've been discussing throughout this entire stream. You can't build a movement on both guilt and both censorship. You can't sneer your way into winning over the trust of the British public. You can't insult people into silence forever. Going back to that Gillian Duffy in 2010, that 2010 election, where Gordon Brown said that she was a bigoted woman, where actually people are accused of all sorts for flying their flags. Lucy Powell's victory, that tells us everything. That Labour's priorities aren't safety, aren't sanity, aren't sovereignty. It's actually three other S's. It's slogans, it's sensitivities, cultural sensitivities, and self-loathing. Self-loathing. And that's why, for the first time in decades, Britain's political future looks brighter as a consequence of a diminished Labour Party. Reform isn't just the alternative to this coalition of chaos and the collapse of Labour giving rise to a coalition of extreme left parties. It's actually the antidote. Reform is our lifeboat. It's our rubber dinghy. You know what I mean? You couldn't actually, I think, articulate this even stronger than I have right now. That's what I think this by-election tells me. So let's have a look at what you've had to say. Grumpy Grandad says, reform is our very last chance. I'm convinced of it. That's why I'm here. We have to get reform in power. And Stephen says they want globalistism. Yeah, that's right. Hillary says Labour have nothing to offer, so they resort to continual put-downs, hoping that the mud they sling will stick. The truth will out. Elaine says, unfortunately, Islamists will take over. That's the plan here. We have too many, and hence millions given to rebuild the mosque that burnt down, but not. I think that's the £10 million or something that was given to mosque safety. But actually, you know, when it came to the terror attack in that Mancunian synagogue, that actually, I think Elaine is arguing that there wasn't the same given to them. Christine says, and I think she's right, this is not what my dad and many brave young men fought for in the Second World War. Yeah. Hillary says, Lucy Powell is Mrs. Dog Whistle. Vanessa says, Lucy Powell is disgusting. And Stephen Field says, on multiculturalism being a success story, my arse. Well, there we are. Yeah, and others arguing that actually they can see a civil war on the horizon. I think this is the last chance. This is the last chance. It really is. To me, there's no two ways about it. So anyway, that's the answer to the question of what I took away from the by-election. Let me know in the comment section if you agreed with my analysis. Now, my good friend Grumpy Grandad wanted me to discuss this story, so I did. Or I will. So there's fury as hard-up Metropolitan Police is set to splurge £5 million a year on 64-strong woke task force as half of its mounted officers face losing their jobs. So local authorities are feeling the strain, feeling the pinch, and the police force is struggling as a consequence. Now, I think you couldn't make this up. While the Met Police are swinging the axe on these frontline officers and closing stables that have served London since the 1700s, stables that we need because there are an increased risk of protest of the kind that look a lot like this, my friends, a lot like this. where you need those horses, you need the police officers to be able to tower over the protesters to bring order to our capital city. London is losing tourism at a rate of knots. We are losing control of our capital city. But they've somehow found 5 million quid a year to bankroll a so-called diversity task force. I've seen and heard it all. That's 64 full-time diversity officers. There are 63 awareness weeks. There's everything from, got a list here. So there's Pansexual Awareness Day. There's Be Kind to Humankind Week. There's World Hijab Day. There's National Tsunami Awareness Week. There's International Trans Day of Visibility. There's Pansexual and Pan-Romantic Awareness Day. I don't know what that is. Maybe it's a penchant for pans. I've no idea. Maybe you go into John Lewis with a hard-on. I've absolutely no clue. There's Be Kind to Humankind Week. There's International Pronouns Day. This is what this diversity task force will be tasked with bringing about within the Metropolitan Police, our biggest police force. All the while, violent crime goes unsolved. You cannot walk down the streets of London with a watch on without fear of them attacking you to get that said watch off your wrist. And the public are told that there's no money for bobbies or police horses on the beat. This is what's happened to policing when it becomes about keeping, instead of keeping order, it starts to be about keeping up appearances. And I'm not talking about the Patricia Routledge keeping up appearances with Oslo and all the rest of it. Mrs. Bucket was the character, wasn't it? I'm not talking bouquet, darling, bouquet. I'm not talking about that kind of keeping up appearances. I'm talking about the kind of keeping up appearances that seeks to appease elements of wackery and wokery instead of law and order. And my friends, it's not just in London, because here in County Durham, our Police and Crime Commissioner thinks that the priority isn't tackling burglaries or knife crime. It's instead about spending your money on glossy leaflets. Now, what are these leaflets, you might ask? Well, they're these here. Migrant Mythbuster leaflets. And the translation, my friends, is a taxpayer-funded propaganda tool to tell you all to shut up and stop noticing. Stop pointing out the obvious. Just had a whistleblower approach me, actually, about a few stories going on in that area. And I can tell you right now that there are significant problems to the safety of the public. I would love for Joyless Allen, her name's Joy Allen, the Police and Crime Commissioner in Durham, Labour of course, to come speak to my residents who have 6 men moving in next door. One of them called me, I'll never forget it, in floods of tears. And she had 6 men moving in next door. They had a police and community meeting in which actually it was decided that the safety of the public was put at risk from the arrival of this house, and that actually the safety of the migrants was put at risk. It's not something I'm advocating. Before anyone selectively clips this up and says Grimes is advocating violence, no, I'm not. But what I am saying is that there are obvious risks to the allocation and enforcement of these types of houses on our country. So, migrant myth-busting, I'd rather that you paid for bobbies on the beat, to protecting us from some of these migrants that are being forced on us, actually. These people don't need a communication strategy. They need a bloody reality check. Ordinary people see through it. If you want us to trust the police, start by protecting the public, not the feelings of activists in hate not hope and all these other things. Reform, our party, says enough is enough. You need to spend our money on real policing, real priorities, real accountability. So I want you to have a listen from yesterday. The former copper and Reform's police and crime lead on Durham County Council, Councillor Robert Potts, he was speaking from our Reform Action Day yesterday. Potts is a former copper who I think has been somewhat disgraced by a leaflet that the Joyless Allen, she's called Joy Allen, by the way, the police and crime commissioner up in this part of the world, she put out a leaflet promoting immigration.
Well, I mean, it's just a distraction technique, Darren, that's all it is. If you're running a police force like County Durham and you've run down the reserves to the point where you're practically bankrupt as a county, then what are you supposed to do if you're the Labour Police and Crime Commissioner? You've got no other choice other than to say, don't look at this over here, look at this over here. When she took over as being Police and Crime Commissioner, she had £36.2 million in reserves in Durham, and we're now down to the bare minimum that we can have. You know, the whole immigration thing in Durham isn't an issue for people of County Durham in general. Yes, I would say that people are concerned that HMOs are getting filled up in the local communities and things, but, you know, people will be concerned on the impact.
Forced on us by Labour as well.
Forced on us by Labour, and they will be concerned about the impact of those things on schools, on benefits, on our hospitals, all of which are on breaking point. And with regards to safety, you know, people are very, very concerned that if you're sat in a house and somebody in the house attached to yours suddenly turns up with 5 or 6 people, males, normally are fighting age males, and they're looking over your fence or they're moving in next door to you, what the impact is going to be on you and your family.
So, you know, I say, how dare you? How dare you use our money at a time when there is heightened tensions within our communities? People scared. People actually contacting me on a daily basis. And it breaks my heart that I can't say to them, I can stop this. We are introducing Article 4 planning directives in County Durham. And that means that every HMO, and that means a home with multiple occupancies that are being used to house migrants, not just migrants, there are students as well, but in this day and age, it's becoming about migrants, that actually the establishment of these things have to go through the planning process. And if we deem, you know, members of our planning committee deem that there is a risk to the safety and security of people, that they can put a stop to it. We are doing that. We are using every tool and instrument at our disposal to actually be able to counter this. But the money spent by Joyless Allen of the Labour Party on the migrant mythbusters at a time when my residents in deprived parts of the county, in County Durham, which is a deprived county, telling me they're absolutely terrified, scared shitless every single day, you put out a migrant myth-busting leaflet. You rub their noses into this and say that actually their concerns, their priorities aren't valid. And this is the Labour dogma. This is what they want you to be immersed in every single day. And I've put a Freedom of Information request in, by the way, to find out how much of our money they spent on producing this. But it goes back to Grumpy Grandad's point here. These dates for your diary, the events that Scotland Yard, their diversity calendar, the dates that they'll be looking into, and the 5 million quid splurged on this, it shows you that there is a movement at hand here to actually attempt to undermine our faith and confidence in policing, that we view them as an activist class. And that's not good, actually, when you lose faith in bobbies on the beat. And by the way, I do not blame police officers for this. Rank and file officers, I do not blame them. They are shit scared that they're going to lose their job if they say anything. They are not the problem here. They are good people who go out for a thankless job and do a hard yard every single day. This isn't me actually attacking police officers. This is me attacking the people that we elect as police and crime commissioners, the people that we elect into positions in government, the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, and all these other people, that actually what they are doing is prioritising whackery and wokery over law and order. And that is my worry here. So, now, let's go through some of the comments on this issue. Yeah, public safety doesn't come into it. Vanessa says propaganda is not the job of the police force. Exactly. It is the enforcement of the law, or it ought to be. And Judith says, well, maybe that little man who's a mayor, you know, the mini mayor, little Mr. Napoleon complex personified. You heard of him? A Mr. Khan, or rather can't do out. Well, this little man, Judith says, maybe he can actually get the horses to come back, and this crap load of pandering can be hit on the head and buried. I think the only crap, Judith, isn't coming from the horses anymore. It's coming from the politicians. I really do. Nicole says this woke mind virus has infected the public sector on a grand scale. And Layla says, my God, this sounds mad. Simon says, Theresa May and Cameron started the police in dissent. They did. They cut policing. They cut the numbers of police. They cut the money going into it. And, you know, crime did actually, for a time, go down. But we've had a hell of a lot happen since then, in which actually crime has done the opposite. It's gone off. It's gone off. Off the scale, that is. Grumpy Grandad says, I worked with the mounted branch. There isn't many of them to begin with. Yeah. And CJ Thomas agrees with me. Horses are brilliant for crowd control. Michelle argues that reform is the reason that civil unrest isn't happening in this country. Elaine's been watching a protest from Southampton in which police on horses walked around protesters. So there were women there were children, there were older people, disabled people and dogs, and huge horses with one policewoman kicking her horse over and over to move it. She says it was surrounded by people and couldn't move. There was no need to use horses as this was a peaceful protest. The masked thugs throwing bottles of urine over the patriots, but no horses around them. Yes, it does seem, doesn't it, that the police force are being utilised as a protection ring for the obnoxious elements of the protesting classes today, who are protesting everything from Palestine to whatever else. Maggie says, thank you. So glad I can join in. So many of you good people are charging, which pensioners can't afford. No, I get that, Maggie. I do get that. But, you know, I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place here, because I left a job in telly and to become a county councillor, and I'm now deputy leader of the party. Most of my days are swallowed up by council business. I'm not complaining about that. I think it's I'm honoured to be doing it. But it let's be honest, it ain't paying television wages. So I hope that actually in building a community here, I can also build up and plug the gaps that have been created through leaving GB News, which was either a very stupid thing or a very brave thing to do. I'll let you decide. But actually, speaking of GB News, I will be honest, in about 20 minutes, arguing about should local authorities, should councils be forced to fund and house, you guessed it, migrants. So I'll have a thing or two to say about that. You bet your bottom dollar I'll have a thing or two to say about that. And the martyr says, I really hope so, responding to Hillary, I hope that reform haven't hit their ceiling, as Professor John Curtis thinks. Well, on that point, look, here's what I think about that. I think that ultimately, once people see that Poland coming out closer to a general election, showing that there is a prospectus of a coalition of the Greens, Plaid Cymru, the Scottish National Party, the Lib Dems and the Labour Party, all of them splitting off and coming together to form a ragtag coalition of Gaza supporters, of migration madness, of hard left anti-free speech sentiment, of tax, of turning Britain into a internationalist airport lounge, of benefits, bed and board for those who don't have any right to be here, but they would have a right to be here. Migration would be off the charts. Britain would be unrecognisable. Law and order overthrown. Whackery and wokery permeating through every vestige of British life, not just our education system, but permeating through every part of British life. Once the British people start to actually become alive to what faces them at the ballot box, a choice between the Reform Party, not the Conservatives. The Conservatives, as I say, are so backbench, they've fallen off the seats in the House of Commons and they've gone down into the sewers underneath the Palace of Westminster. A choice between Reform and a choice between the ragtag coalition of hard left extremist politics. Once the British people become alive to that happening, I think everything changes. I think that they said, the likes of, and I respect John Curtis, I've had him on my GB News show when I existed many times before. I respect him. He is a knowledgeable man who has been around a long time, and I don't wish to discredit his opinion. But they said this when Reform was at 10%, that actually they'd reached their ceiling. They said this when Reform was at 15%. Oh no, they've reached their ceiling. They said this when Reform was at 20%. Oh, this is just because of a bit of, bad press around migration and protests and all these other things. They said it when Reform was at 25%, when Keir Starmer did over our pensioners and all these other things, and the Tory party looked about as useful as a chocolate teapot, and it became clear what they'd done to this country through the Boris wave of mass migration, untrammelled, unchecked mass migration. That actually the Tories didn't stop the boats, and the Labour Party basically said, we're open, more open than a Bonnie Blue OnlyFans account. They said this when we got to 30%. This is the ceiling, this is the ceiling. Reform won't go any higher. There aren't more racists. There aren't more people who care about migration. There aren't more people who care about a patriotic alternative to the hard left extremism running riot in our country. Who care about their families, who care about issues like free speech, issues about freedom of association, issues about safety on our streets. And they say it now when we're at 35%. They say we've reached our peak, that this is the absolute highest that Reform is capable of going. But I tell you right now, I think once that coalition becomes clear, that people can see the writing is on the wall and the alternative is either a pro-common sense Reform position or a pro-hard left extremist position in this coalition, this ragtag coalition, rainbow-coloured, like one of the new vomit-inducing trans flags, that actually people will wake up to the undoing of Britain and its last chance, its last semblance of hope, its last semblance of sanity, its last semblance of regaining the rich inheritance that our ancestors fought and died for, that they built in this magnificent project that is known as the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, that we must do everything we can through the sanctity of the ballot box to nurture and protect that worthy endeavour that so many brilliant men and women have helped create, shape and protect. I think when we get to that, you'll see that 35% was not the ceiling for Reform. And I hope and pray with all of my heart that I'm right on that. But that's my feeling. That is my feeling. Be positive, my friends. Have heart, my friends. Hilary Shaw says, Reform can smash the ceiling like Wonka in the glass lift. She's not talking about Sir Keir Starmer. She said Wonka, not the other word. Wonka, she said. She's talking about Willy Wonka going up and smashing the ceiling of the factory with little Charlie and going off into the heady heights of the sky. That's what reform's going to do. I agree with you, Hillary. I agree with you. All right, I better go because I better get ready for GB News. But thank you so much to all of the subscribers and supporters who've tuned in. Please do consider becoming a paid subscriber and joining our exclusive reform? Well, I guess it sort of is, but there are other people in there. Our exclusive chat community here at Darren Grimes Unleashed, where you get my uncensored, unvarnished takes on all of these matters. And I hope you've liked the topics. Next week we'll do the same thing, and I'll ask you again in the chat exclusively what you want me to talk about. You are the ones that dictate and decide the terms of this conversation. So thank you again. I'll be about in the chat. I'll be about writing posts. I'll do some updates, and we'll keep the conversation going. Carol says, brilliant rapport and dialogue tonight, Bonnie lad. Enjoy GB News next. I will try. With any luck, they'll be saying, Grimesy, we need you back. I'm going to write you a big old check. That would be nice, wouldn't it? I won't hold me breath. Tighter than a fish's bumhole springs to mind. All right, good night, my friends. Good night.